Security will escort you out. The room went silent the moment Victor Langston said those words. 30 executives sat around the long glass table. Their faces turned toward me like I had just admitted to robbing a bank. My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. Victor stood at the head of the table with calm confidence, holding a printed report. $12 million doesn't disappear by accident, he said. His voice stayed smooth and steady. And the transactions were processed under Natalie Brooks' credentials. My hands went cold. Some people stared at me with shock. Others avoided my eyes completely. One director slowly pushed his chair back as if he didn't want to sit near me anymore. I tried to speak, but the words stuck in my throat. That was the moment it hit me. Victor wasn't confused. He wasn't asking questions. He had already decided the story. He had just blamed me for his crime. What he didn't know was simple. I had kept every screenshot. My name is Natalie Brooks. Until that morning, I was a senior compliance analyst at a private investment firm in Chicago. My job was simple in theory. I protected the company from financial fraud. Every day I checked transactions, approvals, and account movements. If something looked strange, I flagged it. Most people hated compliance work. I loved it. I liked patterns, details, and clear rules. Numbers rarely lied if you looked closely enough. That was probably why Victor trusted me with so many internal transfers. Victor Langston was the head of finance. Everyone in the company respected him. He spoke calmly, dressed sharply, and moved through meetings like he owned the building. People believed him. And that was exactly why he chose me. When someone powerful needs a scapegoat, they choose the quiet person who works behind the scenes. But Victor didn't know one important thing about me. When something feels wrong, I don't ignore it. I document it. Victor Langston had a reputation inside the company. Executives praised him during meetings. New employees tried to impress him. Even the board members greeted him like an old friend. He had helped build the company's finance department from nothing. For years, profits had grown steadily under his leadership. People trusted him without question. At first, I did too. But small things started to bother me. Victor began sending late-night messages about urgent transfers. He asked me to process certain transactions quickly without sending them through the usual approval chain. At first, the amounts were normal. 200,000 here, 300,000 there. Large, but not unusual for a firm. Still, the timing felt strange. And the instructions were always the same. Handle it quietly. That phrase kept repeating. In compliance work, patterns matter. And Victor's pattern was starting to look uncomfortable. The first moment my instincts truly flared happened on a Tuesday evening. I was about to leave the office when my phone buzzed with an internal message. Victor, need a quick transfer processed before morning. Don't flag it yet. I'll explain later. The amount made me pause. $480,000. Technically, it still fell within his authority as finance director. He could approve transfers like that. But something about the message felt rushed. Victor usually wrote very formal emails. This message was short and careless. I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then a quiet thought crossed my mind. If this ever caused problems, I would need proof. So before touching the transaction, I opened my screenshot tool. Click. I saved the message. Then I processed the transfer exactly as instructed. At the time, I believed I was simply protecting myself. I had no idea that one screenshot would eventually expose $12 million. After that night, the requests kept coming. Not every day, but often enough to stand out. Victor would send a quick message with instructions. Process quietly. Temporary adjustment. We'll reconcile next quarter. Each transfer looked legitimate on the surface. They went through company accounts and followed technical procedures. But the tone always felt strange. Victor seemed eager to avoid attention. So, I developed a small habit. Every time he sent an unusual instruction, I captured it. Screenshot. Saved email. Internal chat record. I created a folder on my personal laptop titled Unusual Requests. Inside it, I organized everything by date. At first, it felt almost silly. Just a cautious backup in case anyone ever asked questions. But the folder kept growing. 10 screenshots. then 20, then dozens. And slowly, without realizing it, I was building something much bigger. A timeline. 3 months later, everything exploded. On a Monday morning, the entire finance department received a sudden meeting notice. Mandatory attendance. Conference room A. When I walked in, something felt wrong immediately. The room was packed. Executives, legal staff, internal auditors, even a few board representatives. No one spoke much. The air felt thick with tension. Victor stood near the front beside a projector screen. He looked calm, almost relaxed. That alone made my stomach twist. When the meeting started, he cleared his throat. Preliminary investigations have revealed a serious issue, he said. Everyone leaned forward. There appears to be approximately $12 million missing from internal accounts. Murmurs spread across the table. I felt my chest tighten. Victor paused for dramatic effect. Then he slowly turned his head and looked directly at me. You process the transfers, Victor said calmly. For a moment, I didn't even understand the sentence. Then the room shifted. 30 pairs of eyes moved toward me. Shock, confusion, disappointment. My throat went dry. That's not possible, I said quietly. Victor folded his arms. The transactions were processed under your credentials, he replied. His voice sounded patient, almost sympathetic, like a teacher correcting a student. The projector screen lit up behind him. Rows of transaction logs appeared. My employee ID sat next to every transfer. My stomach dropped. I knew exactly why. Because I had processed them. Under Victor's direct instructions. But he had left that part out. Victor sighed and shook his head slowly. This is very serious, Natalie. And just like that, the entire room saw me differently. 10 minutes later, security arrived. 2 uniformed guards stepped quietly into the conference room. My laptop was taken first. Then my company phone. My badge stopped working immediately. Victor avoided looking at me while it happened. I walked across the office floor with the guards beside me. Whispers followed. Some coworkers stared openly. Others pretended to focus on their screens. The elevator ride felt endless. Humiliation burned through my chest. But something strange happened as the doors closed. I stopped feeling panicked. Because the moment Victor blamed me, something had clicked in my mind. The evidence. The screenshots. The folder. Victor believed he controlled the story. He believed the system would protect him. But he had forgotten something simple. Every instruction he gave me had left a digital trail. And I had saved it. Every single piece. When I reached home that afternoon, I didn't cry. I didn't panic. Instead, I opened my laptop. Then I opened the folder. Unusual requests. The screen filled with files. Screenshots. Emails. Chat logs. Each one dated carefully. I began scrolling slowly. June 3rd. Victor instructing me to process a late-night transfer. June 18th. Another request marked urgent. July 2nd. 3 separate messages about account adjustments. The pattern was suddenly clear. Every questionable transfer matched one of Victor's instructions. The timeline lined up perfectly. My hands rested on the keyboard while a quiet realization formed. Victor thought he had destroyed my career. But the truth was sitting right in front of me. Documented. Time-stamped. Impossible to deny. For the first time all day, I felt calm. Because I knew something he didn't. The story wasn't finished yet. 3 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID showed the company's internal audit department. I answered carefully. The voice on the line sounded formal and cautious. Natalie, we're reviewing the transaction activity connected to the fraud case. I stayed quiet. We'd like to understand the transfers you process. Of course they would. Victor had already told them his version. I imagined the narrative clearly. Careless employee. Unauthorized actions. Company victimized. I took a slow breath. Then I spoke calmly. I can provide documentation. There was a short pause on the line. What kind of documentation? The auditor asked. I glanced at the folder on my screen. Dozens of files waited there. Messages Victor had sent. Instructions he had written. Proof he probably believed no one kept. Records of every instruction I received. I said. The silence on the other end lasted longer this time. Then the auditor replied carefully, "We'd like to see those." Later that afternoon, I joined a video call with the audit team. 3 faces appeared on the screen. Serious expressions. Professional tone. They began with basic questions. Dates. Transaction numbers. Authorization procedures. I answered each one calmly. Then I shared my screen. The first file appeared. A screenshot of Victor's message. "Process this transfer night." The timestamp showed 11:43 p.m. Below it sat the transaction record. Exact match. One auditor leaned closer to his camera. "Do you have others like this?" he asked. I opened a folder. Rows of screenshots filled the screen. Messages. Emails. Internal chats. Each one tied to another transfer. The auditors went quiet. I kept scrolling. By the time I finished, their expressions had changed. They no longer looked skeptical. They looked concerned. Very concerned. Over the next week, I sent them everything. Every screenshot. Every message. Every time-stamped instruction. The audit team built a detailed timeline using my files. At first, their emails sounded neutral, professional, careful. But as the days passed, the tone shifted. Questions became sharper, more precise. They wanted clarification about specific transfers, approval paths, account numbers. Each answer pushed Victor closer to the center of the story. Finally, one auditor wrote something that made me pause. These instructions appear to originate directly from Victor Langston. Appear. They were choosing their words carefully, but the meaning was clear. The evidence didn't show a rogue employee. It showed a boss directing each step. And if the investigators kept following that trail, Victor Langston's carefully built reputation was about to collapse. About 2 weeks after the audit began, I heard something interesting. One of the auditors emailed me with a simple question about a transfer date. At the bottom of the message, he added a short note. "Victor has been asking a lot of questions about what documentation exists." I stared at that line for a long moment. Victor was nervous. Until then, he had acted calm and confident. In the meeting where he blamed me, he looked completely sure the story would stick. Now, he was asking the auditors what evidence they had. That meant something important. He didn't know about the screenshots. Or at least, he didn't know how many I had. I imagined him sitting in his office, trying to keep control while the investigation slowly expanded around him. For the first time since the accusation, the balance of power had shifted. Victor still had his title. He still had his office. But the truth had started moving. And once it starts, it rarely stops. Not long after that email, the company brought in external investigators. That was when the situation became serious. Internal auditors could review company records, but outside investigators had more authority. They could examine banking systems, server logs, and financial trails across multiple institutions. The investigators contacted me within days. They spoke calmly, but their questions were detailed. They asked for the original screenshots again. Then they asked for the exact times I received Victor's messages. When they compared those times with the company's server logs, something interesting happened. Every screenshot matched. The messages existed in the system exactly when my files said they did. Nothing had been edited. Nothing had been altered. The timestamps lined up perfectly. One investigator said something quietly during our call. "This documentation is very precise." I understood what he meant. Victor's instructions weren't just suspicious anymore. They were now part of a verified digital timeline. As investigators continued their work, a clear pattern started to appear. The $12 million had not disappeared all at once. Instead, it had moved slowly over several months. Hundreds of smaller transfers, most between $200,000 and $500,000. Each one looked normal when viewed alone. But when investigators lined them up on a timeline, the pattern became obvious. The transfers followed the exact same schedule as Victor's instructions. Late-night messages, urgent approvals, quiet adjustments. Every transfer I processed had a matching message from Victor telling me to do it. The investigators built a chart showing the entire chain of events. Victor's instruction, my action, the money moving to another account, When I saw the chart during one meeting, I felt a strange mix of relief and anger. Relief because the truth was becoming clear. Anger because Victor had planned all of it. Victor didn't give up easily. Inside the company, he started defending himself. I heard from a coworker that he told executives the messages were taken out of context. According to Victor, he had only been discussing routine transfers. He claimed I misunderstood his instructions. He even suggested that someone might have manipulated the screenshots. That argument might have worked if the screenshots were the only evidence. But they weren't. The investigators now had the server logs. They had the internal messaging records. They had email archives stored on company backups. Every message Victor had sent me existed in those systems. The timestamps matched. The wording matched. The instructions matched. Lies can sometimes survive rumors, but they rarely survive digital records. And Victor had left far too many of them behind. When the board of directors stepped into the investigation, everything moved faster. The board rarely involved itself in daily operations. Their job was to protect the company at the highest level. But $12 million was impossible to ignore. Board members reviewed the evidence, personally. Every screenshot. Every transaction log. Every message. The investigators explained the timeline in detail. Victor's instructions. The transfers. The destination accounts. The growing financial trail. For the first time, the story Victor had built began to collapse in front of people who once trusted him completely. I wasn't present during those meetings, but the auditors later told me something. The board members asked a simple question. Why would Natalie Brooks document these instructions if she planned the fraud herself? No one in the room had a good answer, because the truth was already clear. Then investigators uncovered something even more troubling. One of the accounts receiving the transfers led to a small financial company that barely appeared in public records. At first, it looked unrelated to Victor. But investigators kept digging. Ownership documents showed the company had been created 2 years earlier. The listed director had a familiar last name, Langston, Victor's cousin. When the investigators presented that discovery to the company's leadership, the room reportedly went silent. The pattern suddenly made perfect sense. Victor had not simply moved money randomly. He had been directing it into an account connected to someone he trusted. Someone outside the company. Someone who could quietly move the funds further away. The investigation had now crossed a new line. This was no longer just a workplace dispute. This was a carefully planned financial scheme. And the evidence trail was pointing directly at Victor. The next morning, something unusual happened. Victor didn't come to work. His office doors stayed closed all day. His assistant told people he was working remotely. But rumors spread quickly. People had heard about the shell company. They had heard investigators were asking deeper questions. The confident leader, who once walked through the office like he owned it, had suddenly disappeared. Coworkers who had avoided me earlier now seemed uncertain. Some even sent short messages asking if I was okay. The mood inside the company had changed. Doubt was spreading. And doubt is dangerous for someone trying to hold a fragile story together. Victor had spent months building a fraud scheme. But he had only spent minutes building the lie that blamed me. And that lie was starting to fall apart. Exactly 1 month after the morning I was escorted out, my phone rang again. This time, it was the Human Resources Department. Natalie, we'd like you to come in tomorrow, the manager said. Her voice sounded polite but careful. I arrived the next morning feeling strangely calm. Walking into the building felt different this time. No security guards waited for me. No whispers followed me. A few coworkers even nodded quietly as I passed. The HR manager met me in the lobby and guided me upstairs. We entered a conference room where several people were waiting. 2 company lawyers, an investigator, and a senior executive. The atmosphere felt serious but not hostile. For the first time since everything began, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. The senior executive began speaking first. Natalie, thank you for cooperating with the investigation, he said. He slid a thick report across the table toward me. The review of financial records and internal communications is now complete. I opened the report slowly. Inside were pages of timelines, charts, and summaries. The executive continued speaking. The investigation confirms that you processed transactions under direct instruction from Victor Langston. My chest loosened slightly. Evidence also shows the funds were directed toward accounts connected to individuals outside the company. In other words, Victor's scheme. The executive folded his hands. You followed the procedures available to you at the time. The room stayed quiet. Then, he added the words I had waited to hear for a month. You are cleared of any wrongdoing. The company acted quickly after that meeting. Later that same day, employees received an internal message from leadership. Victor Langston was no longer with the company. His position had been terminated immediately following the results of the investigation. The message didn't include many details, but the meaning was clear. Victor's career at the firm was over. The confident leader, who once controlled the finance division, had lost everything in a single day. Inside the office, people whispered about the investigation. Some expressed shock. Others admitted they had noticed strange things before but never questioned them. Power can hide problems for a long time. But once the truth appears, people start remembering details they ignored earlier. Victor had relied on reputation to protect him. But reputation disappears quickly when evidence tells a different story. And his evidence trail had been impossible to erase. A few days later, the company released another internal announcement. This one mentioned my name directly. It stated that the investigation had confirmed I acted within my responsibilities as a compliance analyst. It also praised the documentation I had provided. The message was short, but its impact was huge. Coworkers who had once looked at me with suspicion now sent messages of apology. Some said they felt terrible for believing the accusation. Others admitted they should have questioned Victor sooner. I appreciated the words, but something inside me had changed. The past month had taught me an important lesson. Trust in a workplace can disappear very quickly. Reputation can flip overnight. Even when your name is cleared, the experience leaves a mark.
I realized something during that time.
Sometimes the best victory is not simply returning to where you were. Sometimes it means choosing a new path entirely. 2 weeks after the investigation ended, I received an unexpected email. A partner from another financial firm wanted to speak with me. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But during our meeting, the partner explained something surprising. Their company had heard about the investigation. More specifically, they had heard about the documentation I kept. Your records helped uncover a major fraud, he said. In our industry, that level of attention to detail is extremely valuable. He offered me a position in their compliance division. The role came with more responsibility and a much higher salary. For a moment, I thought back to the day Victor blamed me. The humiliation,
The fear.
the uncertainty. Now, those same events had opened a completely new opportunity. Life sometimes works in strange ways. What begins as a disaster can slowly become something else. Something better. Looking back now, the morning Victor blamed me felt like the worst moment of my career. I remember standing in that conference room while everyone stared at me like I was guilty. At the time, it felt like my entire future had collapsed in a single sentence. But the truth is something powerful. It doesn't always appear immediately. Sometimes it waits quietly while lies grow louder. Victor believed his position would protect him. He believed no one would question his story. What he forgot was something simple. Every action leaves a trail. The screenshots I saved were never meant for revenge. They were simply protection. A quiet record of instructions that felt wrong. In the end, those small screenshots told a story Victor couldn't erase. And the person who tried to destroy my career ended up revealing his own truth instead.